Fuddruckers in Dalton, Georgia. It's time for the most succulent program online today, Tales from the Futon with Lucas Kaler. Featuring this edition an interview with former WCW Announcer Scott Hudson. And now the most succulent man alive today, Lucas Kaler. Woo, baby! Woo, jacket, baby! We're gonna do this hot. We're gonna get this right. We're gonna do this in the most succulent, juicy, decadent fashion we can. Well, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the program. I am, of course, let me adjust the mic a little bit there, Lucas Kaler, the host of Tales from the Futon. And boy, am I excited to bring this episode to you. Trying out some new theme music there. I know my friend Jonathan wrote the music from before, but I'm not sure if he even knows I'm using it. I'm not even sure if he likes the fact that I would be using it. That's something he kind of made just for me, and I've been using it. But anyway, welcome to the show. This is the Scott Hudson episode. This is the episode that I'm excited about. Not going to be a whole lot of bits and stuff in this one. As a matter of fact, we're going to get straight into it. But first, I do want to say my last guest was Matt Sells. He had a loss in the family about a few days, I think a week after we recorded the interview for that episode. And so, Matt, I still do want to say, and I know it's been a little while, my heart's with you, and I know exactly how it feels. And you know, you're one of us, whatever us may be. But you're definitely one of my friends, one of my brothers, and I do hope you find peace with all of that. And also, I do want to say, I know the release schedule, the recording schedule of this show is a little bit unpredictable, and that's by design. I don't want to have a set number of guests per month, mostly because to be doing all the things that I do, it's a little bit tough to squeeze in making sure you have a guest every 14 days. Maybe I'll get better at that. I don't know, but the one guest that I have been excited and been looking forward to have on the show is one that promised to come on recently, and I've just now gotten the chance to record the episode, so I'm really excited about this. He worked for WCW, WWE, TNA, and it's Scott Hudson, a former Turner Broadcasting, former WCW announcer. This is going to be a fun show. This is going to be a fun interview, and I really hope you all enjoy it. I actually haven't recorded it yet at the time of this recording, so we're going to be going into this together. But what you're about to hear is the interview with Scott Hudson, and once again, I hope you enjoy it. On the phone with me right now is, he was one of the voices of WCW there toward the end from 99 to 2000. He also covered Worldwide, and he was there for a few years before that. Ladies and gentlemen, Scott Hudson. Scott, welcome to the show.
I would say that I was the voice of Nitro. Let's just be honest. We can pick that back up and edit that out in post, but sure. All
right. So the voice of WCW Monday Nitro in the last couple of years.
Very good.
Scott Hudson. Scott, again, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Oh, boy. Yes. This is fun. Well, Scott, first of all, how have things been? It's been a few years since I've seen you.
It has been since the Superstars of Wrestling stuff up in Rome. Mm-hmm. But everything's going great. Being a dad, being a husband, working for you. I work for the federal government, so I work for you and everybody listening.
Well, thank you.
But I'm down to about 50 hours a week work now, so that's nice.
Yeah, that is. Well, I guess let's talk about, first of all, because the anniversary of the last Nitro is coming up, and that's the reason why I wanted you on the show, was because that's one of the topics a lot of people like to talk about, but I'm sure you've answered a lot of questions about that. So first I want to talk about your earlier years in the wrestling business and how exactly you got to TBS.
Oh, wow. Okay, well, this will take a couple of minutes, but I'll tell you the whole story. I'm from deep South Georgia, a small town called Tifton. And while I grew up in Tifton, and while I was there, I was a disc jockey on an AM/FM dual signal station there, and did spun the records, the wax and stacks and the peaks and valleys and all that other stuff.
Right.
And I did that and parlayed that into, because nobody else wanted to do it, I became the voice of the high school football team on radio. And I did that, and that worked out pretty well, and did some college football, and then did some high school and college basketball. And I played those sports, so I was, I knew the sports, which helped. Plus, I worked for basically minimum wage.
Right.
Not basically, I worked for minimum wage. So anyway, when I moved to Atlanta in 1988 with my best friends, it was country come to town. We all had really decent, real jobs, and
right.
had graduated college, and went to an indie show. And I've been a mark since I was like 5 years old. I mean, I've been watching wrestling since the days of Danny Little Bear and Big Bill Dromo and Bob Armstrong and El Mongol and those guys in Georgia in the early 70s.
Right.
Went to an indie show with my best friend, Steve Prazak. And the guy that was doing the ring announcing just didn't know whether to scratch his watch or wind his ass. He was lost without a map. And I went to the promoter, who was Joe Pedicino, and I just said, I don't know what you're paying that stiff, but I'll do it for nothing. And he said, you're hired. And I did the ring announcing for the next show. And then he came to me literally the next time I saw him and said, I got an idea about putting you on television. Have you ever done television? I said, I've done radio for, at that point, probably 8 years, but never television. Well, come to Channel 69. And so that parlayed itself into doing Point Counterpoint with Stephen Prazak, again, my best friend, on the Superstars of Wrestling TV show with Joe and Bonnie and a cast of characters. That parlayed into becoming the play-by-play guy for North Georgia Wrestling Alliance and Georgia All-Star Wrestling, the Georgia Indies, back in the early 90s. Well, a lot of the WCW guys lived in Atlanta, and hell, maybe all of them, and they would watch the show because Steve and I would spend basically the whole show just breaking kayfabe, before it was cool,
right?
And just trying to crack each other up because some of the work was spectacularly good, but some of it was just the drizzling shits, if I'm allowed to say that.
Yeah, you're good.
And they would watch the show to hear us because they knew that we knew because we had written for the newsletters and the sheets and the dirt sheets forever, and so we got through that. We got to be friends with Canyon and Disco and Diamond Dallas Page and Brian Clark and that group of guys. Then all of a sudden, Christmas time of 1995, I'm at our Christmas awards luncheon with my job with the feds, and I worked in a pretty high level anyway. So we had a really nice Christmas luncheon at a restaurant in downtown Atlanta, and I had just gotten Employee of the Year. So, whatever, that's very nice, and I was honored to get it. When I came back and sat down at my table with my friends, the maitre d' comes up and says, are you Scott Hudson? I said, yes. He said, I've got a phone call for you at the maitre d' stand. I said, okay, wow, all right. And I go up there, and I said, this is Scott Hudson, and I hear, yo, Scooter, this is DDP. And it was Paige. And I said, what's going on? So it's really not a good time. And he said, no, I got somebody who wants to talk to you. And Eric came on the phone, Eric Bischoff.
Yeah.
And he said, I know you're busy, but I'm familiar with your work, and Paige vouches for you, and Brian does, and Glacier does, and Disco does. So you're a good guy, and you know what you're doing. Can you come in and audition to be an announcer? We've got a spot, and we think you do well. I said, sure. So I went from getting like Employee of the Year at my real job to being offered an audition with WCW in like 4 minutes.
Wow.
So that was a hell of a day.
Yeah, to say the very least. So how did, obviously we know how it went, but what was the tryout like? Like, what did you do, and were you nervous at all?
Well, you've been to Atlanta a million times, but I don't know if you remember back in the mid-'90s in the CNN Center. If you ever were in there, there was a facade down on the main level, and CNN Center has this food court where back in the 70s the skating rink used to be. But there was a WCW facade, and people thought that was the headquarters of WCW. It wasn't. It was the production studio. The headquarters was on the 12th floor of the South Tower. Mm-hmm. So I had to go to that production studio with this gorgeous facade that shone out over the food court at CNN Center. And I walked in, and there's no receptionist. There's nobody. There's just a really nice lobby. And so I sat down. I thought, well, somebody will come out and find me. And all of a sudden, Keith Mitchell, who is just a saint on earth, one of the greatest guys I've ever met, worked world class as a producer, I think still works TNA, just a great guy, stuck his head out of a side door and said, "Are you Scott?" I said, "I am." And he said, "We'll be ready in just a second." I said, "Super, as long as you know I'm here." I waited probably another 20 minutes. Keith stuck his head back out and said, "All right, Scott, we're ready for you." And I walked through that door where he stuck his head out onto the set of WCW Pro.
Oh.
And, with the backdrop and a full camera crew and Klieg lights for days.
Yeah.
And with Bobby Heenan. And Keith said, "Scott, Bobby Heenan, Scott Hudson." Bobby stuck his hand out, said, "Nice to meet you." I said, "Oh, it's nice to meet you, Bobby. I'm a big fan." And he said, "All right, Scott, we're doing a 1-minute cold open, go back and forth with Bobby, and you're tossing to a match with make it up because we're not really doing a match. Just make it up. Toss to something." And 3, 2, and that was it. That's all I had. And in one take, Bobby and I just went back and forth, and I welcomed people to the show and made up a rundown of all they were going to see. And me and Bobby were, he's cutting promos on me, and I'm acting all, rolling my eyes like Gorilla used to do. And
right.
And when he's hitting when Keith is hitting the the hard counts, I'm making them, and I took it out right at 1. And he just said, "Perfect, we got it on tape. Thank you. I'm sure we'll be in touch." And that was it.
Wow.
I left and went back to work because I worked across the street at the federal courthouse.
Right.
And then Eric called and said, "We watched your tape. It was perfect. It really wasn't how you were going to do. It was how you were going to interact with Bobby because he was going to put you through your paces, and you handled everything. He loved you. So can you start Friday?" And that was it.
Wow.
And no, I wasn't nervous at all.
Yeah.
You do radio and all that stuff for all those years. You put all that behind you. The
reason I asked about the nerves is because, I've had moments sometimes where I just kind of stopped and said, okay, wow, like this is it. When I did the IndyCar race at Barber last year, I thought to myself, wow, I'm talking Indy 500 winners and champions. And and I know you talked about one time, we talked about how big of a fan you were of programs like Bill Tush on TBS. And was there ever a moment?
Oh God, yeah.
Was there ever a moment where you said, "Man, this is TBS. Like I grew up with this network or with this station. This is the mothership. This is TBS." Did you ever get that feeling?
Yep, and I'll tell you exactly when it happened. When I got hired, when Eric called me and said the audition went well, et cetera, et cetera, they put me on Pro, which was a Sunday afternoon 5 o'clock show, which was just basically a forgotten show. No new footage except the wraparounds done with me, and I think it was me and Legend Zabisco doing that. And I cut my teeth there and learned a ton from Larry. And then I got put on Worldwide, the syndicated show. Then I got put on some of the international syndicated stuff doing play-by-play. And this would have been in the first part of 90, or the last part of 97, I guess. Eric called me at home one day. I lived out in Lilburn at the time. This is 20 years ago, Lilburn, Georgia. And he said, "I want you to do something else for us." I said, "Name it. I'll work for you. Tell me what you want me to do." And he said, "We want you to become the host of WCW Saturday Night."
Oh, wow.
Because Tony's just got 5 million things going on, and that would just relieve him. And Tony was my boss, Tony Schiavone.
Right.
And he said, Tony just asked, he said, he believes in you, thinks you can do it. He wants out of it because he's got, he's working 90 hours a week. Can you do it? I said, absolutely, where and when. And when I got that call, I just remember hanging the phone up and telling my now ex-wife, who really didn't follow wrestling, nice lady, but just didn't know wrestling from anything. I just said, think of this. It's been Gordon Soley, Tony Schiavone, and me. And she said, that's great. Who are they? And I'm like, okay, well, you don't understand. But I was like, wow, since 1973 or 72, when Gordon took over for Ed Capral, and it was on WTCG before it was WTBS, and then it was just TBS, I said, it's been Gordon, Tony, and now it's going to be me. There's only 3 guys that ever hosted that show. And, I'm one of them. And I was just losing my mind.
Yeah.
Being on Nitro, being on everything else, meeting all these people, that was great too. But being like the 3rd person to ever host that show, oh, God, that just right now telling you, still I've got chill bumps like right now because I'll never forget that feeling.
And I wanted to ask that question because you talked about the lineage going back to 1973, the longest-running show that WCW ever had. You think about the champions, you think about the announcers, you think about everybody that was a part of that show. It must have felt really special to get to be the host of it those last few years.
And we did good numbers. That was the thing. When Gordon was hosting from 73 and he left from that a little history. Remember Black Saturday when Vince took over the Saturday night slot? Well, Ole started his Championship Wrestling from Georgia group the next week. Turner gave him the slot at like 8 o'clock on Saturday morning. So Gordon was the host of that. So Gordon was the host from 73, and I think that ended at the end of 85 when Crockett bought out the slot from Ole and Tony took over. For that entire period, I watched everything that was going on that show. It was the soundtrack of my life as a wrestling fan. And again, I sort of, God, I'm getting chill bumps. I wish I could turn my camera on my phone to the camera gimmick and show you, but I'm getting chill bumps just thinking about it.
So one question I did have was, Tony Schiavone put you over from time to time on his podcast, and I wanted
I listened to it. What Happened
show.
When with Conrad Thompson. Yeah, great stuff.
And so my question for you is, describe the relationship with Tony Schiavone. What was it like working with him?
Awesome. Again, he was the boss. He was in charge of all of the announcers, among many other things at WCW. But he's a terrific guy, and Tony's like me and like Tenay is that we were marks from way back. And
right.
God help anybody that wants to be an announcer in this sport, Corey Graves or Michael Cole or any other worthless dim bulbs that are out there now masquerading as announcers or any of the stunt tits on WWE that hold the mic for the interviews. You better be a mark. You better have a healthy respect for the business and for the men and women that get out there and bust their ass in the ring to put on the show.
Right.
And I hope that came across in what I did because I felt that from Tony. Tony gave me a piece of advice when I first started. And remember, when I started with WCW, I'd already been doing wrestling on television at that point for 5.5 years. And remember, I also did, I had been in the business and on television for about 6 months before I got on ESPN with Global.
Yeah.
And I was doing ESPN wrestling on the Global Wrestling Federation, a daily show that we taped out in Dallas, Texas, every Friday and Saturday night. So I had been doing TV wrestling at various levels of, viewership for 6 years by that point. And Tony told me, he said, and I'll never forget this, he said, an announcer will never draw in one additional viewer, but a bad one will chase away thousands.
Yeah.
And every time that mic turned on, I remembered that nobody's watching that show for me. I'm still honored that anybody knows I was part of it, but that pretty much to me means I wasn't doing my job. I'm not supposed to put me over. I'm supposed to put the guys over and the pay-per-view and Skittles and whoever else.
Well, I think a certain
it's humbling to have
a certain subset of the fan base, I feel like,
right
would
understood. And we'd have millions of viewers, and I haven't had 1 million people come and say I remember you, and that's fine. But that was my role, was to put them over. And the best thing you can say about an announcer is he made me appreciate the sport, whether it's wrestling, whether it's football, basketball, auto racing, whether it was last week at the Daytona last weekend or
right.
this weekend at the Folds of Honor. That they made me appreciate the sport. They didn't make me appreciate how good an announcer he was. They made me appreciate the sport and the character and maybe want to go buy a hat or a shirt or whatever.
Certainly. That's what a good broadcaster does. They draw out and they illustrate the passion of the sport. And I feel like that's key, especially in wrestling, when it's a scripted environment and the audience at home knows that. You've really got to hammer home that point.
Correct. That's exactly right.
So walk me through, because until you got called up to Nitro, you did Worldwide, Pro, Saturday Night, these shows all being pre-taped. Walk me through a typical day of laying commentary over a show like Saturday Night.
Of Saturday Night? Can I just tell you like what a typical week was like after the Nitro thing hit?
Sure.
That'd give you a little more context, and I'm sure your listeners are probably going to drop like in plots right where they sit. But remember, I am a dedicated, legally educated federal public servant, so I have a job that takes me 45 to 50 hours a week to accomplish. Full stop. That's enough for most people.
Right.
And it was enough, not that I'm not most people, it was enough for me, believe me, and still is to this day. So imagine that. Sunday morning, I wake up, and my travel's been arranged by WCW. I drive from my house, which was in Smyrna, Georgia, just about 20 miles from the airport. I drive to the airport, catch a flight, and fly to, make up a city, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I go to Pittsburgh Sunday morning, get there at, 11 o'clock, noon, whatever, go through the production meeting with Russo and whoever else. We do pre-tapes, and then there's a pay-per-view that night. We do the pay-per-view from 7 to 10 or 8 to 11, and then I throw everything in my rental car and drive to Buffalo. Get to Buffalo about 2 in the morning, check into the hotel, sleep as much as I can, check out of the hotel, leave the hotel, make a 10 a.m. production meeting, do pre-tapes, get ready, make notes, and do Nitro that night from 8 to 10, run back to the hotel room, sleep as much as I can, get up at 4, jump in my car, go turn in my rental car, jump on a plane, fly back to Atlanta. I'm already dressed up, get my car out of the parking deck, and go to my office, and I'm at my office at 8:30. I work all day Tuesday. Work all day Wednesday. Wednesday night, I will go to the TBS studios, which you can't really see them now, but right there in Midtown Atlanta near Georgia Tech, where they used to tape the Saturday Night Show when it was in that little tiny, tiny studio when Gordon was hosting. And then from there, I would do Worldwide from the studio at the TBS Tuckwood Drive studios, either with Mike or with Legend, a couple of times with Bobby. And that would take, until 6:30, 7. Then I'd go home, work all day Thursday, go home, work all day Friday. Friday's over, go back to the studios at Log Cabin, which is where WCW's headquarters were at the time, and do Saturday night, and then do the voiceovers for International Nitro and International Worldwide, which aired everywhere except the United States. Did those with Larry Zbyszko. And then get home Friday night about 11 o'clock, and then except for the pay-per-views, which were only once a month, started over Monday morning.
Yeah, that's pretty exhausting, obviously.
That was damn exhausting.
Yeah.
I remember my wife, who is just a beautiful, still beautiful, she's what, 30? Is she 30? No, she's actually 50, and she's gorgeous. Beauty queen, just was a beauty queen then, and it still looks just like she did in her picture, so I'm the luckiest guy in town. But I remember telling her, I said, when this was going like that, like I just described to you, I said, one day I'm going to look back at this and wonder how in the hell I pulled this off. I'd love to talk about it, but I got to go. I'm in, Vancouver tomorrow night, so I got to get some sleep.
Right.
So, as I look at it now, as a 53-and-a-half-year-old, I'm, still to this day, not that I'm a big fan of my work, but I'm actually a big fan of myself, because I made it.
Right.
Like not made it, survived it, like that I'm alive. Not that I made it like, oh, you were on Nitro and you were on this. No, I'm proud of myself because I'm alive that I made it this far.
So as far as the shows that you did the commentary for, again, Worldwide Pro, Saturday Night Nitro, which was the most fun to get to work on? Who was the most fun work partner, you would say, at the booth? Or, in announcing, because I know pre-tapes you're just doing it in a studio, but who was the most fun person to work with, and what was the most fun show?
Okay, that's two different questions.
Okay.
I've got two different answers.
Okay.
The person is easily Larry Zbyszko. It's not even close. I mean, I love Tony. I love Mike, love Mark, love Brain, God rest his soul.
Right.
But Zbyszko and I became fast friends, and to this day remain fast friends. Talked to him this past weekend. Just really hit it off. He's a good bit older than me. He's probably, Ledge has got to be 70, I guess, or close. Maybe a little north of that. Whatever. But and this is interesting. If you watch the show, you would think that Larry is this curmudgeon, bastard, always negative, and just, that kind of guy. Just the not dirty old man, but grumpy old man kind of guy.
Right.
And that Bobby was like the life of the party, lampshade on the head, always cracking jokes, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They were the exact opposite. And as much as I love Bobby, and again, may he rest in peace, he was not very happy. And it wasn't because he wasn't a happy guy. He just wasn't happy with WCW.
Right.
And I was there when he was there, and he just didn't like it. He just didn't like, hell, you name it. Eric, Vince, God, who all was there that was running the company. Whoever it was, he didn't like it. He wasn't happy. But on the air, he seemed like the life of the party. And he was a professional. He was always nice to me. But from his on-air character, you would think, oh, God, I wish I could have, win a contest and have Bobby Heenan over for, wings and beer watching, a WCW pay-per-view.
Right.
You really didn't, because he wasn't that fun to hang out with. But Larry, who came across the exact opposite, I would give anything if Larry would come back to Atlanta and say, hey, I need a place to stay. Hey, can I come stay with you for a couple of days? Oh, my God, yes. I'll tell you what. In fact, I'll just stay in a hotel. You can have my house. Just let me come over and hang out with you. He was that. So Larry was the most fun guy that I worked with, bar none. But the most fun show was Nitro. No question. I tell people in my line of work, and I'm in the legal field, I'm in court, arguing and making cases, and you have to, I don't know if, you're not a lawyer by any chance, are you?
No.
By education. If you were, or those that are listening to your podcast are,
right.
You know that you have to think on your feet immediately. You've got another lawyer over there who thinks he's smarter than you. You've got to be smarter than them. And when you do live television, there is nothing on earth that I don't drink enough to make a difference, and I've never done an illegal drug in my entire life. They do background checks on us and drug test us, so I've never done it. But I can't imagine all the booze in town or any drug that would give you the rush of doing live television.
Even on a local level, even on a local level, I co-hosted a show in Chattanooga, and it's the same thing. It's just fun. It's electric. It's like you said, you've got to think on your feet. It's fast-paced. It is fun.
Yeah, it is. I had, I'll tell you this. In my current job, oh boy, I seriously, Lucas, I can't give away a whole lot about what I do.
It's okay.
But suffice to say that I am the boss. I supervise a team of about 110-ish people of varying degrees of education, from lawyers down to just bachelor's degree level folks. So these are all like crazy smart people that I just have the utmost respect for. And we today did interviews of people for a promotional opportunity, which is a pretty big deal. And when I called, my panel and I are sitting in the conference room, and we're ready for the next guy to come. I promise this has a point. I called him on my cell phone, and I was going to say, hey, Lucas, are you ready to come down to the main conference room for your interview? That's what I do. They wait around the office somewhere, and then I call them in, and then we do the interview. Well, he is a funny guy that I've known for 20 years, and he just said, well, unless you all want to come down here, trying to be funny.
Yeah.
And he was. And so I immediately thought on my feet, put the phone just a little bit away from my mouth, and I just said, hey, you all, he wants us to come down there where he is. Is that okay? And they just looked at me like, have you and or him lost your mind? No, he's got to come to us. And I said, no, you got to come down here, Tony. Like that kind of thinking on your feet, you don't get from being the boss in a government agency or managing a quick trip or, having a construction crew. You only get that from working radio and or television.
Right. Yeah, again, it's
please know that guy actually is probably in line for a promotion. He was terrific, and he bid on that. He just cracked up, so it worked.
That's good for him. That's really good. So,
and he doesn't even know that yet. So if this is live, congratulations.
Hopefully he won't hear it until later. So we get deeper into the year 2000, and the merger with Time Warner is coming up. A lot of anxiety, at least amongst fans. I was going to say, walk me through the merger with Time Warner. What was that like as a company to survive?
Well, with Time Warner?
With AOL, the AOL and Time Warner.
Yeah, with Time Warner was nothing. Time Warner was just, an extra bunch of letters on the paycheck. Who cared? We were making money hand over fist.
That was 96, right?
Yeah. That's exactly right. When Turner Time Warner, which was a company, merged with AOL, that's when everything went to hell. And flag the tape on this one, Lucas, because this is the money shot, as it were. What killed WCW was not Vince, Russo, or McMahon. It was not Eric. It was not the contracts given to Kevin Nash or Hulk or Goldberg or Randy or anybody like that. What killed WCW was Jamie Kellner. Jamie Kellner was the person brought in by America Online. And when was the last time anybody gave a shit about America Online?
It was before 2000 at least. Yeah, it was even before the merger.
That's true. He came in and he and Brad Siegel, who wasn't nearly as offensive a human being as Jamie Kellner, but was in that same realm, was a distant second. Let's put it that way. They came in, and the first thing they did was look at WCW and say, let's see, this division only turned a $4 million profit last year. It's wrestling. That's not what we want. We don't want the toothless, knuckle-dragging, troglodyte, bitter clinging to your guns and your religion crowd. That's not what we want. We want to be much more urbane and sophisticated. So it doesn't matter if they're making money. They're canceled on all of our broadcast platforms, on our pay-per-view contracts, on our broadcast networks. They're gone. So we immediately went from being worth $50 million to being basically worthless because we had no outlet to put our product out. And that's what happened.
A little bit of background about Jamie Kellner, by the way, because I'm actually reading a book right now on the whole thing. It's called Season Finale. It's pretty good. Jamie Kellner actually was the person at Warner that launched or helped launch the Warner Brothers Network, and then he was moved over.
True.
He was moved over during the merger, right? To running
That's
TBS.
Correct.
Okay. So he also was involved
yes.
He also was involved in launching Fox.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Back in the late 80s, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So he had a lot of background in television and had never worked for a network that had wrestling before, and I guess didn't know what the drawing power of pro wrestling was, unfortunately.
That was one of many things he didn't know. And there's that thinking on your feet again. Yeah. But keep in mind that he was gone within 6 months.
Yeah.
He came in, destroyed WCW, destroyed it. Saturday night, Nitro, the pay-per-views, hell, worldwide pro, international syndication, you name it. He destroyed it and was gone in 6 months.
I read somewhere one time that even after all of that, and it's been as long as it has been, that TNT has still never, outside of basketball, matched the ratings on a Monday night that Nitro had. Is that true? Do you know?
That is exactly true. And let me tell you this, it gets worse, Lucas. Here's the thing.
Okay.
When we were going, God, nut to nut against Raw, and famously we won for whatever, 83 weeks or whatever it was, in a row, and then they took us back over, and then they won until the end. But regardless, whether we were winning or they were winning, on the Monday Night Wars, there were 10 million people watching wrestling on Monday night. We did a 7, they did a 3, we did a 6, they did a 4. Then when everything went south and we started to suck, they did a 6 and we did a 4. But it didn't matter. At that point, it was every point was around 972,000 viewers. So you can say 10 million viewers if we were doing a 6 and a 4. When that was going on, there were 10 million people watching wrestling on Monday night between the two of us. And then when everything turned for us and they started kicking our ass, well, that's the breaks. We were going to, we were trying to find ways to come back, and it was going to turn around again. And then they killed us. And you can make all the arguments in town about how bad Vince fucked up the invasion angle, and he did, and he's an idiot. And I don't have any respect at all for Vince McMahon. And if you're listening, Vince, up yours sideways with a razor wire wrapped cactus.
Damn.
Yeah, I don't like him.
All right. Fair enough.
So there goes the why don't you go to the WWE question, I guess, if that were on your list.
No.
But you think about it, and now you look at the ratings for Raw, which are in the complete toilet. They brag about breaking 2 million viewers.
Yeah.
2 million. Between the two of us, we were doing 5 times that. Those people didn't die.
Yeah.
I mean, just say they did. Say some did die. Well, that means, God, say it's a plague. There's still 8 million people left. Where are they? Well, they're not watching wrestling because Vince screwed it up so bad that he took 10 million viewers and increased it to 2 million.
Well, you look at
that's what he did.
Go ahead.
Well,
I was gonna say
if you remember back in the early 90s.
Uh-huh.
I don't know how old you are.
23, but I've got a good memory.
Okay, but if you go back and look at do your Google foo and remember the O.J. Simpson case, when he was acquitted of killing his wife and that other guy, he obviously did it, but he got acquitted. And the line among those of us in the legal profession was, the Los Angeles Police Department is so incompetent they couldn't frame a guilty man.
Right.
And that's what happened in the O.J. case. And what happened in the Monday Night Wars is Vince took 10 million viewers and increased it to 2 million. I mean, he shed 8 million viewers by buying his competition. I don't get it. I don't understand it at all.
Well, and we talk about the argument of, where did all the viewers go? And I know you're as big a NASCAR fan as I am. The Daytona 500 this past week.
Yes.
They blame the low ratings on the Winter Olympics. The highest-rated Daytona 500 ever aired during the Winter Olympics in 2006. 33 million viewers in 2006 versus 6 million this past week. You could ask the same question.
And it was actually a great, spectacular race this year. It was a
fantastic race,
It was a great race.
So, did you ever meet Jamie Kellner by any chance?
No.
No?
He doesn't want me to. There aren't enough points on my knees to strike all of the points in his scrotum that I would love to strike for killing my company and the company that raised me in the professional wrestling business. But I understand that he is also washed out of the Gospel Music Television Network, too.
What?
So, yeah.
Wow.
Do a little Google foo on him, and I don't know what he's doing now, but
Right.
he was involved in gospel music television. It's come to that.
Pun intended, good Lord. So
Yes.
we get
Thank
closer, the merger with AOL happens, and things get closer and closer to what ends up becoming the end of the company. When did you, well, let me back up. Summer of 2000, perhaps one of my favorite pay-per-views ever, and I'm not going to ask the question about the whole Hogan deal, but Bash at the Beach 2000 as a whole, we talked about it in private one time. You said what we saw was what you saw and what we got. What was that show like to do? Was it as much of an beautifully unorganized mess that ended up working out well as it seemed on TV?
Yes, and that's a perfect way to put it. When we did it, I remember Tony came to me that morning and said, "Hey, what about if we all get like flowery-ass Hawaiian shirts to wear since we're at the beach?" I said, "Sure, sounds good to me." I said, "I don't have one. I brought like 3 suits, but I don't have that." And he goes, "Well, go out and find it. Just turn the receipts in and whatever." I was, all right, so if you'll go back and look, we're all wearing these crazy-ass Hawaiian shirts.
Fun question, or fun point about Hawaiian shirts. My brother and I went on vacation a couple of years ago, and we got some, and he still refers to mine as my Tony Schiavone shirt. Still.
There you go.
So
very
yeah,
good.
so it's burned to memory in at least 2 people's minds.
Now, I'll say this about Bash at the Beach 2000, and please understand this, and I'll say this, and I've screamed it from the mountaintop now for 18 years. I would follow either Vince Russo or Eric Bischoff into battle anytime. They were never anything but professional with me, and I believed in their leadership abilities and their vision for the company. I have no heat with either one of them. I love both those guys to death. But when we got to Daytona, I think it was the Ocean Center that we did Bash, and I'm doing all this from memory, believe me. I don't have my Google up. I'm not looking at this. But when we went down there, and we went through the production meeting that morning at 10, we went through, and I can't remember the card. Believe me, if I had my Google up, you would know I'll be rattling off Kid Romeo matches and Kiwi matches and all this other stuff. I have no idea. But whatever the show was, we ran through everything. What was going to happen, what the finish was going to be, we knew everything. When we got to the main events, and there were 2 or 3 of them, Vince was like, "We're still working on that. We'll let you know. We're still working on that." Okay, cool. I said, do, don't, whatever. We'll call what we see.
Yeah.
And we never heard. We never heard a peep. And when we walked out there, we didn't get the intros on the pay-per-view. It was before the pay-per-view started. But when they brought us out, they, "Ladies and gentlemen, your broadcast team." And off we come down the ramp, and they cheer, and they're very nice. And then we sit down, and we're like, we don't know the finish of the main event. And like, "We'll let you know. We'll let you know when we get it worked out." Oh, terrific. And we're sitting out there, getting a countdown like we don't know the finish of the main event. We'll tell you. We'll tell you in a break. And we never heard. So we literally called what we saw.
The reason I ask is because one of your quotes at the end of the show, "The Miracle on 110th Street," which is one of my favorite calls of a finish in a match. You had no idea Booker T was going to win the world title.
No.
None. And that just...
I'm glad he did. He deserved it. He earned it.
Well, and that was a damn good match, too, him and Jeff Jarrett.
Yes, it was.
Now, that's, Jeff Jarrett, very underrated. I don't know why a lot of fans don't like him.
I don't either.
I think it's
we're getting kind of off the rails here.
That's okay.
But he's in the Hall of Fame. I don't know when this is going to air, but it was announced this week that he's in the WWE Hall of Fame, and it literally made me tear up because I know what he's been through recently and over the last 30 years of his career. He's earned that times 10. He's earned that.
I think it's revisionist history is the only reason why he's just now getting the accolades and the credit he's always deserved. And that goes back to,
Yeah.
I mean, my God, you look at how he got TNA off the ground, and I know you were a part of the early days of that company. You look at how he got TNA off the ground, and that's pretty damn impressive, too.
Yeah.
As
Yes,
a promoter, as a performer, a well-rounded individual when it comes to this business.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly right. I just couldn't agree more. I mean, Jeff's got his demons like everybody else, and he had to go through the rehab recently, and I appreciate the WWE, although I will not appreciate anything Vince McMahon does. Screw him sideways with a razor wire wrapped cactus. But he did help Jeff, and I love Jeff, and he's earned his spot in the Hall of Fame. And the people that say he hasn't earned that spot just drive me nuts.
Yeah.
They're 20 years old, and they think they know everything because they remember when Mike Awesome was the fat chick thriller. Like, nothing. Jeff Jarrett's been around this business since he was, tearing tickets for Christine and Eddie Marlin in 1977. He's paid his dues. He's earned his stripes. And, to say that he doesn't deserve a spot in the Hall of Fame, but Coco Ware does, is insane.
Yeah. So we move on through the year 2000, and from your point of view, try to describe that whole year, both behind the scenes and what you saw on television. What was it like? Because it had to have been wild, I guess, would be one word. Just unpredictable as far as what you saw on television. I can't imagine what it was like behind the scenes.
I can tell you. And please keep in mind, you and I haven't spoken, in a couple of years.
Yeah.
So you haven't fed me these questions.
Right.
But when you asked me that question right then, the first answer that came to my mind, and it's the one I'll stick with, is Crash TV, because that is exactly how Vince described it. Vince Russo.
Yeah.
He said he wanted his television show to be like watching car crashes or train crashes or plane crashes on YouTube, that when you watch those, you just click to watch the next one. What's the next one? What's the next one? What's the next one? That you just couldn't stop watching. You could bury it and, I can't believe I'm watching all of these plane crashes where people died. Let me click the next one.
Yeah.
And that's what he wanted. I mean, nobody's dying on WCW television, obviously, but that's what he wanted, that you just couldn't turn away, the Crash TV component. That's how Vince described it. And again, I would follow Vince in the battle today.
Yeah.
February 2018, I would follow him in the battle today. But that's how he described his television show, and it worked for me. That's how I would describe late 99 into 2000 and early 2001.
So when, Russo leaves late 2000, I guess?
Yeah.
So Russo leaves, and creative direction starts to turn around again. Right towards the end of the company, how did you feel about the way WCW was headed right before the company got bought?
Oh, we were on our way back. I mean, we had hit the nadir of our creative work. And we were going to be on our way back. And the Monday Night Wars were going to crank back up again. And it would have been another one of those, WCW is back on top again, and they're going to be on top for another 83 consecutive weeks or whatever, and then they would have beaten us again. I mean, there's no doubt about it. That's just the way of the business. So we were on our way back, no doubt about it. No doubt at all. And then Kellner comes in and cancels all of the television stuff, and then he's on the unemployment line trying to sell gospel music to, the Roops.
Yeah. So when the final Nitro comes up and it's becoming ever more apparent that the company was bought, when did you know? When did you find out that it was going to be March 26th was going to be the final night?
When I got there, when I got to Panama City Beach. Again, to go all the way back to the beginning of the interview, remember that I grew up in deep South Georgia. So I spent, I don't know how many weekends at Panama City Beach.
Right.
it was only like a 3-hour drive. We'd check out of school at 4 o'clock. We're on the beach by 6 because you lose the hour. And then we don't get a hotel room. We just sleep on the beach and then come back Sunday night. That's just the nature of the beast when you live in South Georgia or North Florida. We were in Panama City Beach, and Tony Schiavone comes up to me. And this is a place I've been to, Panama City Beach, a million times. And I'm thinking, I can't wait for this show to be over so I can go to my old haunts around the beach and, maybe find a couple of old girls. And he says, we're sold. So what do you mean? He said, we've been sold to the WWF. And almost like out of a movie, in walks Shane McMahon and Jimmy Hart. And, God, I don't remember if Bruce Pritchard was there or who it was. It might have been Bruce. And they could not have been nicer. But, they had a meeting with all of us and told us what was going on. And the show that we had laid out was truncated from, I think we were still at 3 hours, was truncated to an hour, maybe in 20 minutes. And the last match was going to be Sting and Flair. And, we went through whatever was laid out. And then we got to Sting and Flair, and Tony and I were the only announcers there. And we both, because they had some issue with Mark, and he had been bounced out. But, it was just me and Tony. And we called the match, and I just told Tony before the match started during the commercial, I said, you know what? Fuck Vince. If he doesn't like what I say, I'm going to go out pissing him off more than I've ever pissed him off in my life. I'm going to call Sting by his real name. I'm going to talk about the history. I said, you call the match. I'll do the color, and I'll do the history of these two, and I'll talk about Bill Watts, and I'll talk about, all this other. And that's what we did. And when the match was over and Vince did the, I hold WCW right in the palm of my hand, that horse shit.
Yeah.
Tony and I just left because we knew we were done. That was the end of the show. And Tony came to me, and we go backstage, and, oh, man, this is kind of emotional. And we go backstage, and everybody's crying and carrying on. I knew that I was going back to my job as a federal, law guy,
yeah.
And that I would be fine. But some of those people, they didn't know where their next paycheck was coming from. Not just the wrestlers, but the crew and everything else. And it was emotional. And Tony comes up to me and he goes, when's your flight? I said, it's like at 6 o'clock in the morning. He just said, don't worry about it. Come go with me. And I grabbed my stuff out of my room, and Tony had a rental car, and he and I drove back to Atlanta from Panama City Beach, like 5 hours.
Wow.
And we spent the whole time talking wrestling, talking how he broke in, talking how I broke in, our favorite stuff, our favorite guys, our favorite matches, the biggest bullshit we've ever seen. And so then finally he got to my house. I got to the airport and dropped me off at my car, and that was the end of WCW.
Well, that's funny because even though on a much, much smaller scale, the company that I worked with for 5 years, Empire, the small promotion in North Georgia, when we had our final show, that's almost exactly how it went. My brother and I rode to the show together, and I told him, take the car home. I'm going home with somebody else. And the booker and I went to IHOP together, stayed out until 4 o'clock in the morning, and then as slow as we could, just rode home talking about wrestling in the same fashion. So I wonder if that's just kind of the nature of it. I don't know. It is.
I'll tell you the perfect example, Lucas, is Jimmy Hart, who I think is just one of the great managers ever. Whenever you would see Jimmy at WCW, and I'm a huge mark.
Right.
So whenever I see Jimmy, I'm just completely marking out for Jimmy Hart. I just love the guy to death. I would go up to him and just say, hey, Jimmy, how's it? And he knew who I was. Like, Jimmy, how's it going? He goes, I'm just floating, baby, just floating. And I finally one day asked him, I said, Jimmy, we've been working together for like a few years. And for a while there, he was the booker of Saturday Night. That's why that show was so good, because Jimmy was booking it.
Right.
Like when Duggan picked the U.S. title or the TV title out of the trash can when he was doing the janitor gimmick, and and Barry Darsow with the putter gimmick and all that. All that was Jimmy. And I said, Jimmy, we've been working there forever. What the fuck do you mean you're floating, baby, just floating? He said, look, I've been in this business since whatever, he said, 1978. He said, the people that are your best friends today, you'll never see again after tomorrow. So I never make friends in this business. I just float.
Makes
and I
sense.
thought, that is brilliant.
Yeah.
Among all the millions of things Jimmy Hart taught me about the business, that's one that I'll never, ever forget and never not use. That your friends in the wrestling business are a mile wide and a quarter-inch deep, no matter what you think.
Right.
That every day I remember in this business, you're just Jimmy Hart. You're just floating, baby. You're just floating.
Yeah, the more I think about it, I mean, I've not done much in the business in over a year now, and that seems to ring true in a lot of ways. One more question I did have, and then we're almost done, was a lot of plans going forward in 2001 before the company was purchased. Were you a part of Eric Bischoff's plans to move forward had he bought the company? I
haven't the slightest idea. If you find out the answer, let me know. Again, and Eric, as much as I liked him and still like him personally, and I assume it's the same way from him, he was about making money. What was the best for business, which isn't the cliche that the WWE has turned it into.
Right.
So I don't know. If he had plans for me, I would have done it. If his plans were for me to be unemployed, that would have been fine too. But I don't know. I would like to think so because I work cheap.
So what were, after everything was said and done, Final Nitro, as far as anybody knew it, of course you'd go on to do some more work after that in television, but as far as you knew it, would you have been satisfied if that were the end?
Oh, God, yeah. Keep in mind, from when I was 4.5, 5 years old in 1970, I've been watching wrestling in Georgia. I'll never forget my grandfather, Billy Hudson, down in Cuthbert, Georgia. When I went to visit him, obviously my folks took me down there. We would go see my grandfolks like anybody else. And out of nowhere, he just, on that Saturday afternoon, said, Scotty, come on back here with me. We're going to watch some wrestling. And it was the Channel 3 WRBL in Columbus with Jim Carlisle and Fred Ward doing the play-by-play, and it was a live wrestling show every Saturday afternoon at 4 o'clock on Channel 3, not taped,
right,
but live, even then. And I remember thinking, like, this is the greatest thing I've ever seen with, again, Buddy Colt and El Mongol and Big Bill Drummo and Bob Armstrong and all those guys, Danny Little Bear and those cats. From there until right here in February 2018, I'm still that little kid sitting with my grandfather in Cuthbert, Georgia, watching WRBL with Jim Carlisle and Fred Ward. And I'll never forget that feeling. I wish it were still that way, but that's the old man in me coming out. But at some level, I will always be that little kid. And even as crappy as things are now in the WWE, and although TNA is actually, and especially Ring of Honor and New Japan, are way better television shows than anything the WWE is putting out, I still mark out for a good spot or for a storyline that really captivates me.
I'll say this about Ring of Honor. It airs here locally at 3 in the morning on Sunday nights, and I'll either stay up if I don't have work the next day, or I'll record it every single week. It's good television. It really is. My final question.
Yes, it is. I agree.
My final question is this: decades from now, when everything's long gone, what do you think the legacy of WCW will be?
This is difficult to say, and I have never been asked that question before ever.
Okay.
But there won't be one.
Really? Okay.
There won't be one. Yeah. It'd be like asking here in 2018, what's the legacy of the DuPont Network's live television wrestling in the 50s? What's their legacy?
No,
well, there
I know
isn't
about
one.
DuMont, but, a few people do.
But you know, and
right.
I know, and maybe 50 other people know.
Well,
but in the general consensus and the general conscious of the people in the United States, they're going to go, wow, there was wrestling other than WWE? Wow, that's cool. Was it any good? And, and I know that there's YouTube, and I know that there's, DVDs and all that other stuff, but there won't be one. It will be an underground, oh, gosh, that was so fun. It will be like John Waters movies. As much as I enjoy those,
yeah.
The masses have no idea who he is or what his movies were. Or, God, Ed Wood, that kind of filmmaker. Oh, there's probably 3,000 people that know that guy, and his movies. So that's what WCW will be.
You don't think wrestling's impact on pop culture at the time will be at all remembered? I mean, it's not really remembered today. Again, revisionist history says it was a short-lived fad of the 90s, but you talk about 10 million people a week watching. That had to mean something at the time.
It was. It was huge at the time. But then again, so was the last episode of MASH, and except for old farts like me, who remembers MASH was even a television show?
Yeah.
I still, literally, my wife and I will dial up our Netflix app on our smart TV. How's that for 2018? And watch MASH, and it's funny as hell.
Oh, it's still
and my
great.
daughter will walk down and think, that's just not funny. I said, yes, it is. Listen to what he just said. I'll run it back and play it. She goes, I just heard it. It's not funny. And I realized that she's 17 and I'm 53.
Right. Well, Scott, it's been a lot of fun, and if I ever think of some more questions and ever get around to it, it's been a month since I've done an episode. I'd love to have you back on, but Scott, once again, thank you very, very much for being a part of this show.
It was my pleasure, and anytime you want to do this again, you know where to find me. Say the word.
All right, thank you, Scott. This has been Scott Hudson, as he said earlier, voice of WCW. Thank you, Scott.
Thank you.
And that'll do it for this edition of Tales from the Futon. I'd like to thank Scott Hudson for coming on to talk about WCW. I'd like to thank you for listening. Don't forget, if you want to see me do poorly attempt stand-up comedy, you can see me in action at the Honest Pine on Monday nights in Chattanooga, or Boat Trip at Moccasin Men Brewing Company Tuesday nights in Chattanooga. Well, that's going to do it. This has been Tales from the Futon. I'm Lucas Kaler, and until next time, stay hungry